All right, welcome. Just wait for everybody to join. We're still adding people. Okay, I think we have everybody, and since we've reached 1 o'clock, we'll get going and respect everybody's time. So thank you everybody for coming to our webinar today. This is going to be about 45 minutes, so we're going to be going through this a little quickly. The focus of this is really all the considerations that water utilities may want to be thinking about as they consider whether to start a financial assistance program through the PSC program. So we're going to give you a little bit of an overview of how that works. Wanted to go through a couple housekeeping items. Just wanted to let everybody know that this is being recorded, and we hope to have a copy of that recording on the website later on this week. Right now in the GoToWebinar tools, you should be able to see the handouts listed as an opportunity for you to download those right now. So if you want a copy of the slides, they are there in that handouts tab. And if I remember, I'll say that again because I'm 99% sure people will ask that question because they always do. I believe we're getting used to this platform for GoToMeeting, but I believe that we will not have a chat available, but you can ask questions of the presenters by using the Ask a Question function. That's over also in your GoToMeeting tool. Any questions we don't get to today will be used in developing FAQs, or we'll follow up with you directly. And just a note that we are working to build our website resources on this tool with these webinar recordings, FAQs, and handouts. So all the feedback that you give us helps us know what meets your needs. All right, now that we get to our agenda, I'm going to do some quick polls just to get a sense of who showed up. We had a lot of people register, but that doesn't mean everybody showed up. So let's see. All right, I'm gonna launch the first poll. Just trying to get a sense of what the status of your work on lead service line replacement is. If you're with a municipality or if you're with a utility. For those of you who are financial accountants or financial consultants or engineering consultants, just give a sense based on what you're seeing among your clients. And for those of you who are state or federal employees, just leave this one blank. All right, give it a few more minutes. All right, any last minute votes? Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to share that poll so that everybody can see what the results were. So it looks like there are quite a few communities that are still early days. So I think that that's helpful for us to understand that this might be a tool you want to consider going forward. All right, now the next poll, let me find that one. And this, as we saw, a lot of communities haven't really started this process yet, but if you have been doing this, or if you are starting to do this, please let us know what you've been doing to pay for them. And again, for the consultants, just do a guesstimate of the distribution among your clients. Okay, thank you. Keep going. All right, looks like that pretty much finishes. I'll share those poll results. Looks like about 50% are passing this on directly to the private property owners. And then there's a pretty good split of the remainder, safe drinking water loans and principal forgiveness loans. So we'll talk a little bit about how those different programs might interact with this program. All right, back to our regularly scheduled programming. So you'll see here a little agenda that just gives you an outline of what we're going to talk about. As we're going through this, please do put questions in the question function to help us be sure that we're meeting your needs. All right, let's start with this. Why are we talking about utility financial assistance programs? This is just real basic table setting stuff, and that is because customer-owned lead service lines are private property and therefore are treated really differently than utility-owned infrastructure. Here in Wisconsin, there is no approval for using utility revenue, utility rate making, to pay for this private property. So the replacement of these private side LSLs is not something you can put into rates, except if you do one of these financial assistance programs. So that is authorized by a very, very specific statute in a one-off law that was passed a few years ago. So we're going to be going through what that law provides. Note on abbreviations, I might fall into it. FAP, when I use FAP, I'm referring to these utility financial assistance programs that are approved by the commission and used by utilities. I'll use, on a lot of the slides, I'll use the abbreviation PLSL for private and utility LSL, ULSL for utility to try to keep those separated, since utility-led programs are just like any other utility construction project and not a part of what we're discussing today. What we're discussing today is just for private lead replacement. PF, a lot of people answered that they were using PF, so I think everybody knows that that's principal forgiveness under the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program, but just putting that here in case people aren't familiar with that term. All right, so what are utility financial assistance programs? They are utility-run programs offering financial assistance to, quote, the owner of a property to which water utility service is provided to assist the owner in replacing customer-side water service lines containing lead. So that's from the law. The law is about the provision to those customers who have a line that contains lead. In other words, to put it just in real plain speak, FAPs authorize utility to become a grantor lender to use ratepayer funds to create financial assistance tools and help property owners pay for their replacement of those privately owned lead service lines. What are they not? And just want to help with make sure that this is clear. These are not construction programs. So what we're looking at here in the commission is how these financial assistance programs are structured. We are not going to review kind of, you know, putting shovels into the ground. We are just going to look at how you're designing those financial assistance programs that use money from revenue to fund those grants and loans. Also, you should know that here at the commission, it's a two-step process. So to get that financial assistance program approved, that doesn't address any new revenue requirements. That has to be done in a conventional rate case. So we'll talk more about that process a little later. The next couple slides go kind of item by item of the ways that the law limits how these FAP programs have to be designed. So these are straight out of Wisconsin statutes from when the law was passed. So the first thing, and this is pretty familiar to anybody who's been working with lead compliance with DNR, but those private lead service lines must be attached to utility infrastructure that is already lead free or being replaced at the same time. Additionally, financial assistance can be in the form of loans only, grants only, or a combination of grants and loans. However, important to remember, grants, the total grant given to a customer is limited to no more than 1/2 of the total cost to that customer of replacing their privately owned lead service line. Next, if a water public utility intends to provide financial assistance as a % of the cost of replacing the lead service line, that percentage must be the same for each owner in a class of customers. In the alternative, instead of just doing a % available to everybody, you could also do a dollar amount. But that dollar amount has to be offered to every other member of the class of customers that are receiving that financial assistance. So this is an equity control to make sure that no private property owner is treated differently than any other private property owner in that class. Okay, FAPs are also limited to the provision of financial assistance to the owner of a property for the purpose of assisting them in replacing their customer side water service lines that contain lead. No other uses are allowed. So this is really, really limited to understanding how much is it going to cost for that customer to remove their lead service line, and that determines how much they're eligible to receive from the utility in financial assistance. Additionally, any loan that's provided by the utility cannot be forgiven by the water public utility or the municipality. So if you do loans, they can't be forgiven at any point. And then finally, revenue collected from these charges applied to a class of customers to fund this financial assistance may not exceed any amount given in financial assistance. So in other words, in a lot of communities, the majority of these lines are in residential. You have to collect all the revenue to finance the financial assistance from the residential class. You can't over-collect from industrial or commercial or other classes to fund that residential burden. Okay. There are a couple things in the law that a municipality has to do. Specifically, the municipality in which the public utility is operating has to pass an ordinance that does two things. One, it has to permit the water utility to provide this financial assistance. It has to authorize them to give out these grants and loans. And then two, it has to impose a requirement on every owner of the premises located in that city, village, or town that has lead LSLs to replace that LSL. Now that requirement is very similar to what you would see applying for funding through the DNR and the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program as well. And I want to note that it's not required by the law that we're administering, but some communities have added additional municipal enforcement measures to help in the enforcement of the FAP terms. So giving them additional opportunities to contact property owners for repayment. And then just note that these ordinances have to be in place before you can start giving out the financial assistance, but we don't require it at the time of application. So here's what the process looks like at a really high level. You know, first you think about how you're going to design this financial assistance, if you're going to do grants or loans or a combination, what % you're going to offer, total amount you're going to offer, how many lines you think you have, what classes the customers are. You design that program and then submit an application for us. The commission will then review that application and then approve the financial assistance program. So you'll have to get your ordinances in place. You'll have to, get some of that structure in place before you implement. And then if you need additional revenue, for example, if you're giving out grants and you need additional rate revenue, you'll have to apply for a rate case to get that rate increase separately. Just checking for questions. All right. So what are we going to review? This is straight out of the statute. We're going to review the description of the proposed financial assistance. Are you doing grants, loans, combination of grants and loans? What's it look like? What's the repayment schedule? Things like that. How are you as the utility going to fund the financial assistance? You're going to use cash on hand, future revenue, set up an internal revolving loan fund. Do you need a rate increase? We're looking for you to give us an idea on where you think this money is coming from. Then we want to understand the property owners served by the water public utility that would be eligible. Is every customer eligible? Which classes? How many property owners are in each of those rate classes, how many do you think will be getting financial assistance each year? And then finally, the catch-all for all government programs and any other information relevant to the action requested by the Commission. So that's where we're going to look at whether it's meeting these various legal requirements to ensure fairness and equity. We're going to look at how you're going to document your expenditures and track this program. Okay, looking for questions. All right, so just in a nutshell, we're going to really look at the financial assistance program design, what assumptions you're making about the finances, what it's going to cost, and how that's going to impact your utility. All right, rate recovery. We have had a number of, I'm just seeing, it looks like, are people raising their hands, Rebecca? I got a notice, sorry. Okay, so
I don't see any raised, but there are a couple questions. I'm not sure if you want to address them now. There are a couple questions, just so you're aware.
Well, before we run into rate recovery, I just have to figure out where I can see these. I should pop this out. No, utility would not be able to use pilot as a means of financing private LSL replacements. This is done through, this was meant to be the one opportunity where you could use utility revenue. There are other ones. When you state lead, this includes galvanized, yes. If you are treating galvanized as lead, yes, this includes galvanized as well. We are looking to mirror how DNR is counting things for their removal requirements. I cannot get this to pop out. Are there other questions? Because I can't get them to scroll. I saw the galvanized and pilot. Are those the only two that are up?
I only saw 2 questions as of now in the question box.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not able to get the pop out for it, and I don't know why. Okay. All right, so I said that the financial assistance program is the first step. You design that, but if you need additional revenue to fund it, you have to go through a rate case. And so we've gotten some questions about how rate recovery is going to be evaluated. And even though this is about 8 years old, we are in our first rate case right now, looking at how to calculate that revenue requirement. So we can say from the experience of working on that one that how you design your program really impacts how your rates are impacted. So grants and admin costs are eligible for rate recovery. Programs that include grants are more likely to impact your rates because grant is money out the door. It's just straight up expense by the utility. Since loans are paid back to the utility, they do not go into the calculation of rates because 100% loan programs may not actually impact your rates depending on how you're paying for other costs associated with the program. So it's important to know some communities have implemented a FAP without seeking rate recovery because their costs have been manageable and they have had sufficient cash on hand to seed their loan programs, and they've used repayment from other loans to provide future loans. So rate recovery is, again, on a case-by-case basis, and it's going to be based on how you design your program. Now, if you have a FAP, there's going to be some additional annual reporting. I've listed some of the various parts of the annual report where we'll be tracking what you're doing under a FAP. So as everybody's been doing for a few years now, we're going to be asking you to document all the private lead service lines replaced with financial assistance in W29. That's the schedule of privately owned water service lines, and we have an extra column there that helps you, asks you to tally how many of those service lines were removed using financial assistance. We're also going to ask you to update your balance sheet to reflect the outstanding loans you're expecting to receive from customers. And then we're going to ask you to document the different costs associated with running the program. So this is going to be basically grants and some additional admin costs. That depends on which class utility you are, but we've listed the different accounts depending on your utility class. And then finally, just always remember, footnotes are your friend in the annual report. We're going to be asking you to break down costs into sub-accounts because we want to know how much you're spending on grants and how much is being used for administrative costs. As I said, these are really not one size fits all because communities are doing really, really different things at the local level to determine how they're packaging these programs and how they're administering them. They're doing different funding sources. They're using money from the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program. They're using BIL money. They're using municipal dollars that aren't from the utility. They're taking property taxes to use to work on this. And then some are looking to utility revenue for these FAPs. But we're also seeing a lot of different implementation strategies as utilities ramp up. Some are managed by the utilities, some are managed by the municipalities. So those costs are outside of the utility right now. Some are beginning to hire consulting contractors who are taking over the whole project, and then it's just like a contract with the utility. And then some allow property owners to hire contractors to remove the LSLs directly. So your FAP needs to be designed to interface with how you're funding it and who's managing the program. That's why we say that you're really, the discretion is on your side to design a program that meets the law, and then we review it to make sure it meets the law. All right, like I said, since the FAP provides financial assistance to property owners, how your community chooses to pass the costs on to those property owners really influences how much the FAP is going to cost the ratepayers. So depending on how much you charge versus finding money elsewhere, really depends on how much you need to collect from all the ratepayers to pay for this financial assistance. Since no costs associated with work on private property may be paid for by utility rates, except through this financial assistance program, all costs associated with this private work must either be billed to the property owner or paid by a non-utility source, like the municipality or a safe drinking water loan held by the municipality. It is only after determining how much the property owner owes that the cost of financial assistance can be determined. Because again, remember, this is based on the cost to the customer for the removal of their line. So you have to determine how much it costs each line, each customer for removal to determine how much they're eligible to receive in financial assistance. And keep in mind that only half of that can be in the form of a grant. The rest must be paid by the homeowner either directly or through a loan. All right, I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. I just cannot get this to
Angela, I'm able to pass them out, and there is one question. Can I read it to you? Would that be helpful? Yes. So this is the third question. That's the only other question that's come in so far, and it's, what is the average time for the commission to review the request for the FAP?
I can't remember if we have that slide in here. This is under a statutory deadline. Kathy, do you know what it is? Is it 180 days?
For cases that have a hearing, it's 180 days, but these typically would not have a hearing. So the statutory deadline would be 90 days after the application is considered complete. So sometimes we have to obtain additional information or ask for a revised application. I just took a look at one earlier this year, and it took about 4.5 months from the time it was first filed until the time the commission approved it.
Yeah, and I think as we see more of these, that time will shorten. This program has not been widely used, so it's been there's been a lot of work in each of those cases to understand it. So I'm hoping that we get those times down.
One more question, or two more that just came in. Angela, do you want to answer those now, or do you want to wait a bit?
I think I would answer. I wish I could see this. I can't tell you how frustrated I am by this. It's the only one of my boxes that doesn't have a pop-out. Okay, I think I got it. Can a failure to repay loans, bad debt, be factored into the revenue requirements similar to regular bad debt? So I might have to ask Kathy here, but bad debt in the municipal side isn't the same as bad debt on the investor-owned utility side, because most municipalities roll that up onto the tax rolls. So I don't know if this is somebody with experience with investor-owned utilities, whereas all of our lead-containing utilities in Wisconsin, except for one, so this could be Superior Power and Light, are municipal. But if this is something we can address individually, please contact us about that directly if you are investor-owned. All right. Moving on. So this is just another way of showing how your community is doing this really influences how much the property owner pays. We have seen some communities that have been 100% principal forgiveness, which means there's been no cost to property owners. As that money becomes less available, we are seeing communities that are now putting 50% PF and then 50% where the utility is looking to fund it through the financial assistance program. So again, we are looking at the cost to the customers. Some communities are borrowing safe drinking water loan dollars that are not that part of that BIL. They're borrowing at that low market rate, and then they're basically passing the responsibility to repay the loan onto property owners. Again, that is part of the calculation of the cost to the property owner for the removal of their line. And that would be what we'd be asking you to identify how you're looking at that calculation in the design of your financial assistance program. And then we also know that some communities are financing some of the customer side work with taxpayer dollars. That reduces the amount of money that each individual property pays and reduces the amount of money that has to be funded through a financial assistance program. So this is just a brainstormed list of the kinds of things that we think communities should be thinking about as they're considering how to design their financial assistance program. It's things like this. Will you offer both grants and loans, or only loans or grants? Who will be eligible for participating? All customer classes? Do you know where the lead is distributed among your customer classes? Who is going to be administering this? Is there somebody within your utility who is able to administer this, or is this something you'll need to work with a municipal side? How will you account for those costs? How will you fund the program? Is this something you're going to want to do through a rate increase, using cash on hand, any internal revolving loans seeded with money from the municipality or from rates? How will you bill customers for any of the loans you offer? Is this something your billing system can accommodate? And what does that look like for you to implement? How much interest, if any, will you charge on the loans, and where will you use that interest? How are you going to ensure that all property owners will have equal access to this financial assistance? How many participants do you expect to access the financial assistance provided by the FAP each year? How much do you think they'll each need individually each year? How long do you expect it to exist? I know that a lot of communities have different time horizons for being able to remove all the lead in their community. How will your FAP adjust to changes in your construction, funding, or other project parameters? So how will you, in a similar way, adjust how you're offering this, even when the dollar amounts might change or the information that you have might change? How will you assign costs to each customer to determine the amount that they're eligible to receive? So are you consistently including all the same costs as a customer cost to remove this? How will you deal with non-payment? Will you use both municipal and utility measures, tax rolls, disconnection, etc.? What kind of approvals do you need from the municipality, and how will you get them? Like I said, we do require an ordinance be in place, and that ordinance has to authorize the municipality to provide financial assistance, but your local requirements might have more. How will you separate the costs and payments associated with private side replacements from the costs and payments associated with utility side replacement? We understand that a lot of communities are doing replacement of both private and utility side in the same projects. How are you dividing those costs out so that you can determine how much the customer owes for their private property replacement? How are you going to track and account for the costs associated with running the financial assistance program? This is construction oversight, admin costs for sending out the loans, things like that. And then my last slide before I turn it over to Kathy is these are the only approved financial assistance programs we have so far. Now, this is a really quick at a glance. You can see that they were approved all the way going back 7 years ago until our most recent approval here this summer. Some have done 100%, some have done 50%, some have done up to $6,000 per customer. So you can see that's where the local decisions have varied. And then here's just an overview of the different ways. Some have done loans only. Some have done grants only with the customer paying the remainder immediately. Others have done a combination of loans and grants. Some are asking for interest, some are not. So this just gives you a feel for the range of discretion at the local level to identify the type of program that works best for your community, your ratepayers, and your customers. And so with that, do we have any questions before we go on? We're going to walk through a little case. Oh, I do see more. Otherwise, we're going to go through a little overview of some different things considered in the most recent approval, but I can go through some. Andrew, how many FAPs have been approved so far? I just gave the list. I think that's 13. The FAP is pretty challenging for communities with large numbers of laterals. Are you aware of any legislative initiatives to broaden this program? I am not. And I have asked those questions, or there does not seem to be anything moving on that. We use PF for private side and safe drinking water loans for the public side. What if the city administration does not allow utility to do LSLR unless the utility fully reconstruct the road? That is between you and your local government to figure that out. However, we would be concerned about passing costs to customers that we would otherwise not consider appropriate for the removal of the customer line. And also remember that if your local community is requiring the full reconstruction of the road, then you have to take that full reconstruction cost and to divide it among those property owners. So they're paying the full public burden, half of it, because you can only give a grant up to half.
And I would jump in, Angela. We talked about this a little earlier this week, that when you're talking about road reconstruction, that probably impacts the utility portion of the service line a lot more, because the property owner's portion goes from in the curb stop into their building. So it's unlikely that the customer portion has an impact in most cases on the street.
Good point, Kathy. Thank you. What is the deadline for removal? So I know we have some DNR folks lurking right now. This deadline has been imposed by the lead and copper rule improvements, which were passed about a year ago. And that sets a deadline for removal of right now 2037, with utilities able to seek extensions under some circumstances. If anyone from DNR says I'm wrong, please chime in with questions. But that is currently subject to a litigation at the federal level. So we are operating under a 2037 deadline right now, but the courts could come up with a different number. All right, I think that gets everything. And then I think next we'll just turn to the City of New Richmond FAP. It's the most recent approval, and I think it shows how some smaller communities might be approaching this. As one of the questioners said, this is a challenge affecting a lot of communities, but the solutions really differ according to size and what your community is trying to accomplish. So Kathy, New Richmond.
Yeah, thank you. Angela already mentioned this was our most recent docket on the chart that she showed. Angela and I both worked on this docket earlier this year, and it's a pretty well-defined program. I think part of that is because they had a low number of lead service lines that still needed to be removed, so it became a lot more manageable. And they were looking at a 10-year program. Another thing I'd mentioned before we start going through the other slides is that although we understand things can definitely change as you move forward, and it might end up costing more than you expected, or you might find more or less service lines that need to be removed, New Richmond made some estimates and they stuck with them in their application. So everything was nice and consistent in their application for review purposes. So if you want to go to the next slide. The docket number for this case is 4140 LS100. So if you're used to looking on our website, on our filing part, the IRF section, you can search for it there. You can go under this quick single docket search and type it there and just click on documents. And what will come up for you is actually a fairly short list of documents, because this was a simpler case, 12 documents total, and some of them are mailing lists. So there's really not, that much to look at. You can look at what they filed. We did ask a couple questions, and you can look at the final decision in the case to see how it's described and approved by the commission. We can go to the next slide. So a little background on New Richmond Water Utility. It's located in St. Croix County. It has about 4,700 typical customers that we would think of in the regular customer classes, and about 90% of those are residential customers. This utility does have 1,025 irrigation customers, which is an optional customer class that, boy, I don't even know, between 10 and 20 utilities in the state offer right now. But typically your irrigation meter is on the same service line as your regular meter. So that fact really doesn't have an impact on a FAP at all. It's not causing extra service lines or anything like that, but that might be, if you spotted that on the slide and had a question. Another thing that made this maybe a little bit easier for the water utility to plan and us to review is they're in a pretty strong financial position. Financially healthy on the balance sheet. For perspective, their water sales last year, the revenue was about $2.2 million. Again, moving on a little bit here on the same slide to the estimates, the utility was fairly certain they had 182 galvanized LSLs that needed to be removed, but they also estimated that there was 182 unknown may contain lead. So you add it up and you get 364. By now, they might have a better estimate, but at the time, that was the estimate, and that was about 8% of the total service lines in the system. So again, makes the program a little bit more manageable. We'll probably go to the next slide. So this utility was looking at offering loans to the customers, no grants. They looked at treating everybody consistently, so they decided every property would be eligible, and the loans, it's a loan-only program, will go up to $4,000, and they would be 10-year loans at 3% interest rate. Another thing that they did, again, being consistent with their estimates, is they knew not all 364 would actually need to be replaced once they tested the materials. So they scaled that back and said, for our application, we're going to assume 300 need to be replaced. So 300 times $4,000 is $1.2 million. So that was kind of the scope of what they were looking at as well. They decided to place these loan payments as a special charge on the water bill and have their current utility staff handle placing that on their billing system. They also made another estimate that not everybody would even want this $4,000 loan and pay interest on it for a number of years. They knew some people could afford the $4,000 and would prefer to just pay for it up front. So their best guess over a 10-year program was 18 loans a year. A revolving loan fund So they would take utility cash, lend it out, and the customers would repay it back and return it to the utility cash account. So let's go to the next slide. So as I previously mentioned, they used their estimate of $1.2 million to pay for these costs in loans. They also mentioned that administration was hopefully going to be fairly simple, so they estimated about $7,200 for administration. So that puts the total program at about $1,207,000. Using their 18 loans a year at $4,000 a loan, their estimate was up to $72,000 a year they would lend out. On their balance sheet, the cash account had over $300,000 at the end of last year, so they were comfortable that they didn't need any additional funds. They would be able to lend out this money for this program. And again, the property owners would have up to 10 years to repay the loan and a 3% interest rate. Rate impact, New Richmond did not need to file a rate increase. The loans are paid back, kind of returned to the checking account for the water utility. So long-term, the net impact is zero. And the utility was financially healthy. They really felt no need to file a rate case to request recovery of administrative costs, because they said that was pretty low and they could just absorb that cost. Next slide. Again, just a little bit of accounting. Angela shared some of this before. The cost to administer the FAP, basically the administrative costs would go in 641, a sub-account for Class C utilities. And if anybody's been following really closely, you might have said, wait, isn't New Richmond a Class AB utility with all those customers? And now you would be correct. They had been a Class C utility, thus account 641, but they're, as we speak, transitioning to a Class AB utility. So they will be using in the future the Class AB account 664. And the loans, obviously vary how much they are over the year as money is lent out and repayments are made, but that will be tracked in a sub-account and account 124 on the balance sheet. And then at the end of the year, you would include in your PSC annual report what that current balance in that account is. So really that's, pretty much the New Richmond program. I know others out there might have more challenging programs to develop, but I think this was really a good example of sticking with your estimates, working through the math, and showing the commission what you're applying for. That's about what I have, Angela.
I will unmute. I was trying to catch up on some of the questions. So this is just a really high-level summary. FAPs can be a useful tool to help private property owners afford the cost to replace their lead service lines. However, they're really limited to the provision of financial assistance. And the FAP approval allows you to become, as a utility, a grantor and a lender to those property owners. Now, what's different is this is the only way in which you can use funds from rates to do this private side work. FAP approval in an LS docket doesn't provide any additional revenue. Revenue requirements are examined in a rate case, and utilities are encouraged to consider their unique needs, their financial status, the pacing of LSL replacement, in designing their FAPs. We're getting to the end of time. I always put this on there. That is a QR code that if you scan it with a phone, that'll allow you to sign up for our newsletter if you're not already receiving it. That only goes out quarterly and is only used quarterly and to announce training opportunities. Also, please, I put my email there. Reach out to me directly if you have questions. Like I said, although we have, just over a dozen communities that have approved this, we haven't really gone through rate cases, and we realize that as the DNR funding opportunities change, more communities may be looking at this option. So please, if you want to talk about this, we do meet with communities to help them sort of visualize how this might work, to help them think about how it might work in their community. I want to be respectful of time. That takes us almost up to 1:45. So for those of you who only planned on 45 minutes, I think now Kathy and I are happy to stay on the line if there are additional questions. We will record this and hope to make a recording available on our website. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and please reach out if you have questions. All right, seeing a few more coming up. What does New Richmond do with their interest money?
I suppose you're waiting for me to jump in there. You know, they may be using some of it to offset some of their administrative costs, or they may be putting it just in their interest income account and adding it to the cash account. I am not actually sure. We've had other programs with zero interest loans, so it hasn't been a question. And it's something Angela and I have actually talked a little bit, you know, what is the better method of dealing with this interest that they're earning. So I actually don't have a simple answer for that, you know, and I think it'll be continued to be explored as we get some more experience with this. I can probably handle the next one too. How did New Richmond cover the upfront cost to contractors doing some of this work? Like I said, they were pretty financially healthy. They didn't have a big concern about being able to pay some of these contracts. They had enough cash flow coming in and out of the utility. There were some other utilities over the years that necessarily wasn't the case. The very first one for Manitowoc, program that was going to hand out loans, there was a little bit of a concern there. So Manitowoc Water Utility actually filed information with their application saying if they didn't have enough funds, they would take out a loan from Manitowoc Electric Utility to obtain some more money.
Yeah, and unfortunately, because it isn't a construction program, it is a financial assistance program for customers. This is really a way to look at opportunities to mitigate the repayment of those costs by the property owners. So it doesn't provide that upfront cost, except to the extent that the utility holds the amount allocated to grants and takes it off of the bill requested of those customers to pay for the work that was done, if the utility is doing it. Yeah, so this should be available right now. The slides should be available right now in the GoToMeeting under the Handouts tab. Yeah, so for those of you who joined a little late, just double check with the GoToMeeting. We uploaded this, so you should be able to grab it right now. Let us know if you have any questions.
I could maybe add just one additional thing to the New Richmond answer. On the slide, it says that New Richmond would have cash on hand of about $316,000 to start out their program. That was the estimate of what they would potentially pull out of their cash account to start funding this program. But in reality, New Richmond has millions of dollars in their various cash accounts. So if they needed to temporarily fund contractor payments, it would be no problem for them. You know, they just replace it in their other cash account when they needed it. So I just kind of tossed that in to clarify that $316,000 number. That was just kind of a portion for the program.
All right. Seeing no more, please answer the survey that you're about to receive. We're hoping to do more of these trainings, and the more feedback you give us, the more we can tailor this to your needs. Thank you all for coming, and I think we can end it here. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.